So Fred just joined us. So please welcome to Fred. To thank you for participating in our summit.
Thank you, Arthur.
Yeah. As Fred asked me, he would like to, Vasily, could you give a very brief overview of what we have been talking? And I hope this panel description has been helping you, Fred. And before that, I'm going to introduce Fred very quickly. So Frederic Kastner is a London-based social entrepreneur and international development consultant with 8 years experience in leading and managing inclusive incubators, social enterprises, and blended learning programs in urban rural context. He currently focuses on two approaches to tackling forced migration issues. One, enabling refugees through the power of their own ideas. Two, making the next generation of citizens more informed. Welcome, Fred, to this summit.
Thanks, Arthur. And yeah, thank you everyone for having me. I hope I'm audible. I'm on the phone outside, so there'll be certain noises, etc. So I apologize for that in advance. But it seems like you can hear me okay from looking at Arthur.
Yes.
So that's good. Yeah, so thanks for the introduction. Vasily and I are connected through various summits and conferences around the topic of refugee entrepreneurship and refugee-led innovation, and that's kind of my specialism. So it's great to hear a little bit what you guys were saying for the last half hour. In terms of the organization, I'll give you a quick roundup of our organization, what we've done so far in other contexts in which I've worked, and how refugee-led innovation has certainly taken place in those projects. And then we can have questions and answers. It'll be easier for me to have your questions and answer those than kind of just ramble about, seeing as I wasn't able to participate in the rest of the summit. So I'll start with a short introduction, and then I look forward to the other panelists' contributions as well as your questions. So I started this work specifically in refugee entrepreneurship about 6 years ago. So before there was more in a blended learning space and international development. And essentially what I realized is, whilst working for the UN Refugee Agency, that a lot of innovation was often stifled, bottom-up innovation was stifled because of a local competition to refugee-led innovation from people who are basically running the local social care systems in East Africa. And so my impression was at the time that a lot of potential was lost. A lot of amazing people were already displaying multiple years of leadership experience in their communities, refugees, helping refugees essentially. And they had great ideas, and with the right kind of support, they would be able to contribute to a landscape of support, both for themselves and the rest of the local host area. And but I observed, whilst working in those contexts, that there was a lot of contextual barriers and attitudes that weren't making it easy. Obviously, as most of you will know, most international development interventions that benefit refugees also need to benefit the host communities. So in that sense, there is technically a branching off of funds, and I know funds were mentioned earlier in the discussion, to serve refugees and then also serve host communities, so for the distribution. But I do think that nonetheless, there's not always an enabling environment, vice versa, and a cooperation beyond anecdotes. So what I mean by that is, often there are great examples of people who want to collaborate on a local basis, but then not necessarily the holistic approach, such that it takes hold, gets rooted, and becomes part of local practices. So it's about, the fact that such cultures are seldomly established is my impressions. When I later started working on TERN in particular, which is our social enterprise that runs incubation support from A to Z, really, for refugees in the UK and elsewhere, who want to start their own business or social enterprise. We had this in mind, but it took us years to establish. So this idea of establishing more of a co-creation and a refugee-led approach was always on my mind, but it took us years to establish the motor of our operation to really learn how to deliver to our target group well. But in the process of establishing our programs and running them all for 4 times now, we've got 3 distinct programs, and happy to elaborate later. We realized that the wonderful effect was that we were getting so much talent that was informed on a meta level about refugee entrepreneurship, who had gone through the experience of developing their own enterprises, but who also wanted to become leaders in our operations. Sorry for the background noise. In terms of that's the common reality now. But in terms of so what we were seeing now, and I think in our 4th year with TERN in particular, towards the end of our 4th year, we now really have an amazing set of leaders, people who indeed have come up with their own innovations. Many have a social impact idea. All of them have a desire to initially help other refugees to become kind of the face of the franchise for TERN. That's a transformation that's about to happen. And so it does take time sometimes, because you first need to deliver value, identify the right people, and then work with them to become the leaders of tomorrow. That's kind of my experience. That's the side of refugee-ledness, but now we're working a lot on that. So our system is becoming increasingly refugee-led. We've got an objective for 2023 to have all of our operations, strategy, and directorship be 51% refugee-led. So that's an intentional 1% above 50. So I think you can do the math. So this is not about majority or anything like that in democratic sense, although it might well be that that's how it ends up. It's more a goalpost, a lighthouse to walk towards, and increasingly increasingly improve how much refugees are involved in delivering our programs, in setting our strategy and refining what we do, and not just to be treated as community outreach champions, which is important, but it's just a basic step. So that's one side of the story. The other side is European collaboration, and actually 2 more points, I guess. Co-working. And Arthur, please stop me if I should first take questions. Co-working and local collaboration and integration with community spaces around entrepreneurship and ideas. We've got a strong collaboration with WeWork, who have been really good to us, I must say, who provided our community access to free space, co-working space. They've also given us access to free workshop space, and we're actually locking in with their membership community, who become mentors. They don't make our entire mentor pool, but about 20% of our mentor pool for our programs. We also use WeWorks whenever there's no lockdown as a launch space for ideas, because it's quite a healthy environment to expose your ideas as an entrepreneur when it's other small businesses around you, because they tend to be frank but also understanding. They're a bit more forgiving than the average consumer when you expose your product or your service at an event or one-to-one, and tend to be experienced in their feedback. So that's really wonderful for entrepreneurs. It's also an ecosystem where entrepreneurs can offer their products B2B. And it's potentially even an opportunity for offering part-time employment with other SMEs, where newcomer entrepreneurs can learn skills in internships or in part-time employment. That's kind of a vision we haven't fulfilled yet, but it's something I'd really love to do. So that's how we work with WeWork, but actually, obviously WeWork is in a lot of places, but not everywhere. With regards to understanding how much can a local co-working space community support similar interventions, certainly not as much in kind or pro bono as WeWork can, obviously, right? So with the magnitude of actors changes the ability to do in-kind things, I guess. So you're more challenged in a local community like Lesbos, I guess, with regards to finding commercially viable solutions. So the smaller it gets, the more business oriented and financially viable it needs to be. I guess, you know, the more you are a small fish that's adept at swimming between the big fish, uh, great for you in a big city. But if you're in a small city, then you're not that much smaller than the medium size or big fish, because there's not enormous actors in a relatively small community. So I think there it becomes much more compressed space, and people have more financial needs. So it must be hard. So I don't have an immediate solution for that, besides being really good at design thinking, business models, and putting them in practice quickly without too long cycles when it comes to building cooperations with local communities, with local businesses in the co-working and enterprise community, when it comes to solutions like what you seem to have in mind as a collective. So that's another aspect, yeah. And then I guess that kind of interlocks um, with cooperation with the local community. I think whether it's co-working spaces, small businesses, in the end, if people are not well established yet themselves, then you have to find a triple win, really, to make things work. So I'm happy to elaborate on the European questions and such. Perhaps it's a good time to, I'm not sure if the other speakers will come in as well, or if there's other speakers for the panel now. So I'll pause here for a second, take questions, happy to elaborate on anything I've said, or just to debate and discuss. I appreciate it might be a bit out of context, but I just wanted to share my experience.
Fred, thank you. That was absolutely awesome. And I would like if you could just for a few more minutes before I give the floor to Nina, if you could just elaborate and just share a little bit more information about the European projects, because this is actually one of the main reasons that what I wanted to discuss is from a European context of people doing amazing things around Europe and how we could be connected. And there's a project that Nina may touch on that could be connected. So you sharing some information would add additional value. And yeah, then I'll just share something with about George Bellinga, who you actually connected me to after you share this information.
Sure, Vasily. Yes. In fact, I'm happy to. I don't know if I put my video on and if it will take my bandwidth. I look like a bit of a teenager here, but that's okay. So look, in terms of European projects, we actually have various. Some are EU funded, some are not. That's the wonder of it, right? So instead of being necessarily tied to EU funding alone, we also have some which are not, but they are still European. I know some of you probably know about the Human Safety Net, for example. We're not part of that, but that would be an example of a corporate funded project that has touched on refugee innovation and refugee-led or refugee enterprise, if I can say it as bluntly, for a few years now. We're not part of that, not by design or default. I don't think the UK is a priority area for them, but a lot of our partners like Singa Germany, Singa France are in it. And that's just an example of a project that's European in nature. It's been quite interesting, I would say. I think in the European space of entrepreneurship and innovation, there's a whole set of actors who are quite commercially oriented despite a social focus. And so because the organizations have been around for a long time, they're now seeking new endeavors. So Impact Hub, Youth Business International as two major networked actors are looking to move into the space of refugee entrepreneurship, as I would say is Spark. There are two Sparks in the world. Well, two main Sparks and then many offshoots. I mean the one in the Netherlands, which has a lot of international work and also works in entrepreneurship. So those three actors are moving in, and that is not yet complete. So they've just conducted a lot of research. JP Morgan is currently conducting a study to find out who the actors are in newcomer entrepreneurship in Italy, Germany, the UK, Sweden. I'm just giving you a roundup of projects of some we are a part of and some we're not. We are certainly in touch with everyone somehow, but it's not yet a very consolidated space. What I'm trying to say is even commercial actors, there's CSR, and then mid-sized to large-sized social impact actors that are networked and have some inkling of connectivity with entrepreneurship at the very least are now strongly moving into the space of migrant and refugee-led entrepreneurship. So that's interesting. that's a pivot for a lot of them, or a new target group. On the other hand, we've got smaller, more self-organized collaborations. So we have a strong network with Delight Labs in Amsterdam and Rotterdam, with Singer France and Singer Berlin, with Place in Paris, also with Entrepreneur du Monde in Lyon. Singer has connections into Italy, Switzerland, and I think now Spain as well, where they also have setups. And so in those cases, it's been very informal, self-organized, and never financed just for the sake of those strategies that we would want to develop together. So that's a really interesting point. I'll try and construct like a whole picture here, because that's kind of a counter example. Here's bottom-up, grassroots, or mid-sized people who've worked in this industry for a few years, which is relatively long in the case of, say, refugee innovation, refugee entrepreneurship in Europe. I'm not saying there aren't actors who haven't done this for who have done this for 20 years. There are people, but from the newer breed of people from the refugee crisis in 2015, the bubble that came out of that and TERN only kind of emerged around then, or at least when it comes to board. Those actors are actually relatively well connected, and some of the more mid to long standing actors are now very networked. It's now the first time that we are talking about actually setting out a strategy together rather than just kind of randomly connecting to opportunities. And I think that is really key, because we have always followed funding opportunities to scale the program of one organization elsewhere. And I'll give you a more concrete example on that in a second. But holistically, what do we want? What do we want? Both micro and macro for Europe. That is something that we haven't really set out. We have a lot of common principles, but we haven't put the work in. So we're now thinking about kind of getting a little secretariat for ourselves as a small group. I don't mean this to be kind of like an exclusive club. It's just kind of starting small, working, kind of spiraling upwards in numbers, So that's one side. In the middle are things like, so do you mean like, shall I ask questions to the group, or? Sorry, Vasily, you muted. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just saying, let's hold it there just to get the group back on track here. I just want to add a little bit of context. Yeah. Is that okay, or do you want to finish up what you were saying right there now?
I just wanted to say, Vasily, just two things. As another two examples that you can ask some follow-up questions on, guys, is one is we have 2 or 3 European Union funded projects, and happy to elaborate on those later. Also on the positives and negatives of these different angles to collaboration. And then also we've got a project which we've scaled ourselves, which is a collaboration with Ben & Jerry's, where we've taken a program into 4 countries. And that's been repeated 3 times over, so it wasn't just a project. And that's called the ICE Academy. So I'm happy to elaborate on any of those. But yeah, over to you and the group.
Thank you very much, Fred. I had the pleasure of being at your space and see your work, and it's really very inspiring. I just wanted to say, but George Belingo for the thing, is based in Basque Country, and they're doing some similar initiatives through a co-working space. And the program, from a social economy perspective, from a European-wide perspective, the discussion with George, and we were speaking to the local university there and to some of the people in the government, of saying, how can spaces in other cities, regions, say that if asylum seekers come to the city, how can they be, inverted commas, integrated into society? And we're saying that co-working spaces should be used as such. Fred, we just spoke now, said about their partnership at WeWork, and it's incredible the interaction that takes place at WeWork, the volunteers that come and support them. So you in a comfortable environment that local people are in, such as WeWork, and they come into contact with asylum seekers, and it's like people are naturally wanting to help and support, versus a place that's just refugees away from the local community, and the local people are like, that's for refugees. And so this is basically some of the discussions that we want to be able to highlight and exchange what works in every region in the context of the social economy. And some of these are the great organizations on the ground. How do we connect them to the top? And again, I keep on saying about the social economy because, and as Gerard said, we want to have support from the top, and this could sit well within that ambit of the social economy and Mannheim, where we could actually go there and take the next steps. No, the next steps now, but actually concretely show what we've done in the process till then. And with that, I'd like to give it over to Nina to